Alexander the Great, once regarded as the greatest military commander, did something in his youth that shocked everyone, even his father. Because of this event, he received high praise from all around him, and his father began to reassess the son he had previously undervalued. One day, Alexander and his friends went to the horse training grounds, where King Philip and his ministers were admiring a wild stallion that was known for its fierce temperament and was nearly impossible to approach. Many trainers had attempted to tame the horse, but none had succeeded. Philip planned to try taming it himself, but the stallion seemed displeased with him and reared up violently. Seeing this, Philip had no choice but to leave, stating that anyone who dared to ride the horse would surely break their neck. Alexander observed everything closely. He had been watching the horse's every move. Just when everyone thought no one could tame the beast, Alexander suddenly stood up. Philip did not believe Alexander would succeed. Ignoring the skeptical gazes of the crowd, Alexander walked straight toward the horse. As everyone braced for his failure, a miraculous scene unfolded. Perhaps Alexander was indeed the prophesied chosen one. He grasped the reins and gently patted the horse's neck. The previously furious stallion astonishingly calmed down. Then, in front of everyone, he swiftly leaped onto the horse's back. This scene left everyone in utter shock, and Philip was filled with excitement.
Come now. Let's ride together.
When Alexander rode back into the training grounds, he was met with thunderous applause. At that moment, Alexander had no idea that this horse would become his closest companion in future battles. After this event, Philip recognized his potential and decided to nurture him properly. He took Alexander to the caves at Pella and recounted the legendary deeds of great warriors depicted on the walls to inspire his inner drive. Alexander was deeply encouraged, as Achilles was his lifelong idol. As he left the cave, he looked firmly at his father.
One day I'll be on walls like these.
This visit to the caves at Pella reignited Alexander's desire to conquer the East. Years later, Philip prepared to marry a new wife, Eurydice. If Eurydice bore a child, Alexander's position would be threatened. Alexander was not a weakling, and his mother, Olympias, was certainly not an ordinary woman. Although Alexander was furious, he did not react impulsively. Instead, he drank alone. At that moment, Attalus stood up to toast and announced that his niece, Eurydice, would become the queen of Macedonia, and her unborn child would be the heir. Attalus even shamelessly insulted Alexander's mother in front of everyone. Upon hearing this, Alexander angrily smashed his wine cup against Attalus, and the two began to fight, creating chaos. Just then, Philip stepped forward. Alexander expected his father to defend him, but Philip instead called Alexander's mother a witch and publicly declared that Alexander would never inherit the throne of Macedonia. Seeing the mocking expressions on the faces of those around him, Alexander felt his heart nearly shatter.
Good night, old man. And when my mother remarries, I'll invite you to her wedding.
In response to his words, Philip angrily grabbed a weapon from the table, intending to kill Alexander. Watching his father fall to the ground, Alexander left the banquet without looking back. The next day, Olympias found Alexander and expressed her desire for him to join her in seizing Philip's throne. Olympias knew that Eurydice was pregnant, and once the child was born, their positions would be completely jeopardized. However, Alexander refused to act against his father. Despite the insults he had endured at the banquet, he did not want to bear the guilt of patricide. Seeing her son's stubbornness, Olympias urged him to marry a Macedonian girl. She explained that as long as he had a child with pure Philip blood, Philip would name Alexander as the primary heir. Alexander knew in his heart that he was in a situation where he wasn't liked by his father because he was half his mother's blood, but he still felt ridiculous, and then he left in anger. As Olympias watched Philip and his new wife, Eurydice, in their loving embrace, a sinister plan began to form in her mind. Soon, it was time for Alexander's sister to marry, and he attended the ceremony with his father. On the way, Philip mentioned that he had chosen to forgive Alexander for his actions at the previous banquet and advised him not to repeat such behavior. Philip excitedly revealed that he had formed an alliance and was planning to lead a great army against Persia. Since ascending the throne, Philip had been training a formidable army. Alexander expressed his desire to fight alongside his father, and Philip happily agreed. They soon arrived at the ceremony venue, where Philip arranged for Pausanias to bring the royal guards into the hall. As Philip stepped into the center of the venue to deliver an impassioned speech, Pausanias suddenly burst in, walking straight toward Philip.
I told you!
It was then that Alexander recognized Pausanias as the man who had been insulted at the banquet the previous day. Before Philip could react, a dagger plunged into his body. The scene left everyone in shock, and chaos erupted in the hall. Alexander rushed to his father's side to check his injuries, but Philip was already dead. As Alexander mourned, Hephaistion suddenly rushed into the hall. On the platform, Olympias watched the unfolding events, seemingly aware of everything that was happening. In disbelief, Alexander looked around at the chaos. Everything had happened too quickly. He then sought out his mother and confronted her, demanding to know if she was behind this. Olympias said little, almost tacitly accepting the implication. Until this moment, Alexander still had trouble believing that his mother had done it. Despite his father's disdain for him, he was still Philip's son. In a fit of rage, Alexander shouted,
"It's a lie! He was my father! I loved him!"
He was not your father!
What do you know of Philip? No, Alexander. Zeus is your father.
Act like it.
My first act would be to kill you! Murdered me in my cradle. You birthed me in a sack of hate. Hate you have for those stronger than you. Hate you have for men!
I taught you my heart, Alexander! And by Zeus and Dionysus you grew beautiful.
Damn your sorcerous soul.
Your soul is mine, Alexander.
And seeing his reaction, Olympias remained calm. Gradually, Alexander collected himself, inherited Philip's throne, and began to reorganize the Greek states. He directed the blame for his father's death toward Persia, using it as a pretext to declare war. Thus, he led an army of 40,000 against a Persian force of 200,000, and this war would become the battle that solidified his legendary status. Despite the overwhelming odds, Alexander, with his exceptional military command, inflicted over 100,000 casualties on the enemy at the cost of only 2,400 of his own men. He employed a central phalanx as the main point of attack to draw the attention of the Persian cavalry. Simultaneously, he dispatched 3 assault units to create confusion and mislead Darius's judgment. Then, Alexander was able to lead his troops through a gap in the flank, aiming directly for Darius's head. The great battle was about to begin, with both sides' soldiers fully prepared for combat. First to take the field was the main Macedonian phalanx. In battle, infantry often fell into chaos, but the disciplined formation of the Macedonian phalanx could easily defeat numerically superior enemies. To balance the weight of the frontline spears, each spear was equipped with a special configuration at the tail, making the formation more stable. Next, Alexander personally led the cavalry, coordinating with the main infantry forces. Unlike the Persian Empire, where Darius commanded from the rear, Alexander always charged to the front lines. Each Macedonian soldier held a long spear, ready to advance.
And when they ask you why you fought so bravely at Gaugamela, you will answer, with all the strength of your great hearts! I was here this day at Gaugamela for the freedom and glory of Greece!
However, the sight of the 200,000-strong Persian army was daunting, each step seeming to carry the weight of thunder. At Darius's command, a hail of arrows rained down from the Persian army, instantly causing numerous casualties among the Macedonian soldiers. Yet, the Macedonian phalanx maintained its formation, unbroken by the onslaught. Darius then ordered the Persian war chariots to launch a full-scale assault. With the vast numbers of the Persian army, it seemed inevitable that the Macedonian forces would be surrounded, but they showed no fear. The Persian chariots crashed into the Macedonian phalanx, filling the air with the stench of blood and the cries of the wounded. Following the chariots, the Persian infantry clashed with the Macedonian soldiers on the right flank. However, as the main Macedonian forces were dispatched to attack the enemy's right flank, the right-wing phalanx was assaulted by the Persian cavalry. It also undoubtedly trapped the left and right cavalry of the Persian army in the Macedonian trap. Seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Alexander commanded a sudden charge into the enemy ranks. The main Macedonian cavalry split into 2 groups, one acting as bait to draw the enemy's left cavalry. Meanwhile, Alexander led the right-wing cavalry, preparing to strike at the heart of the Persian camp, determined to take Darius's head. As the 2 sides became embroiled in a chaotic melee, Alexander pressed forward toward the center of the Persian formation. In this moment of extreme danger, Alexander fought through the encirclement of the Persian army, closing in within 100 paces of Darius's command. His actions sent Darius into a panic, prompting him to urgently order a retreat for all Persian forces. With Darius's flight, the Persian army quickly collapsed. Thus, Alexander achieved a resounding victory over the Persian Empire, winning this historic battle. At just 25 years old, Alexander became the king of many nations. The world order was fundamentally altered, ushering in a new era of Alexander's conquests in the East. Not only did Alexander possess exceptional military command skills, but he was also adept at winning the hearts of people, allowing him to establish an empire spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa. After defeating the Persian Empire, Alexander entered Babylon, where the common people welcomed him with open arms. Clearly, the former ruler Darius had been extremely brutal to these people, leading them to view Alexander as their savior. All the generals arrived at the Babylonian palace, marveling at the opulence before them. One general excitedly remarked that the gold present was enough to sustain the Macedonian army for 3 lifetimes. However, Alexander cautioned them that endless wealth would only lead to the decay of the Macedonian Empire. As warriors, they should not be blinded by such mundane treasures, for he always remembered his mentor's words: excessive luxury would only bring one closer to destruction. Moreover, Darius had not yet been captured. Although he had fled Persia, Alexander could not rest easy until Darius was dealt with. The group then moved to the palace's garden, where the scene was reminiscent of paradise. Every woman there appeared graceful and alluring, captivating everyone present. They all believed that Darius lived in luxury, yet he ultimately fell to Alexander. Suddenly, a woman dressed in exquisite garments approached, exuding an air of nobility. She was Darius's daughter, Statira, and she pleaded with Alexander to spare her family. Her words drew laughter from the crowd, as she had mistaken Alexander for someone else. Alexander assured her that not only would he spare all her family, but he would also recognize their royal status. Although this land now belonged to the Macedonian Empire, it would still be governed by her royal lineage. Upon hearing this, both the princess and the others present were left in shock. Alexander explained that his campaign was aimed at creating a unified cultural empire, not at indiscriminately slaughtering ordinary people. After a brief rest in the city, Alexander's army set out once more. For 3 years, they conducted guerrilla warfare in the northeastern regions of Persia, relentlessly pursuing Darius to the Great Gorge. Just as they were about to capture him, they discovered that Darius had already died. Upon seeing his corpse, Alexander could not help but lament the fall of a great emperor. After burying him, the whole army proceeded to pursue the remaining remnants of the army, and they pursued them until they reached an uncharted territory. In this vast expanse, after enduring countless hardships, they finally annihilated the remnants in the distant region of Sogdiana. The army did not halt its advance, continuing to fight until they reached the junction of Europe and Asia. There, they established the 10th city named after Alexander, leaving part of the army behind to suppress the barbarian tribes. As Alexander's forces pressed forward, the true test of his resolve began when they reached Bactria. Ignoring the objections of his mother and subordinates, he chose to marry a barbarian princess, challenging the deeply ingrained traditional views of his men. His subordinates expressed their opposition, struggling to accept the idea of treating a defeated nation as an equal partner. Alexander even publicly declared that the barbarians could receive Greek-style education and military training. His words sparked discontent among the troops, with some passionately declaring that the empire would never recognize the children of a barbarian princess as kings. Others reminded him that after King Philip's death, they had supported Alexander's claim to the throne. Cassander further argued that those people were barbarians and did not deserve the lands that the soldiers had fought so hard to secure. Yet, Alexander remained steadfast, firmly believing that only through tolerance and the integration of various peoples could he realize his grand vision of unity. Alexander warned those stubborn individuals that without a spirit of inclusivity, the results of their conquests would be futile, and a truly unified empire could not be established. Meanwhile, Olympias in the Macedonian headquarters was worried about the internal hostile forces and urged Alexander to return quickly to address the situation. However, Alexander believed in the power of the people's hearts and decided to continue his campaign, attempting to persuade the doubters with his actions. Unexpectedly, overnight, someone poisoned his wine in an assassination attempt. Upon discovering this, Alexander was furious, but he felt even more hurt. The reason was that those involved in the plot against him were childhood friends and comrades in arms. Alexander had chosen to marry a barbarian woman to promote the integration of Macedonians and the eastern peoples. He believed that intermarriage among the subjects of the empire would help ensure the nation's longevity and ultimately build a unified empire. Despite his noble intentions, his subordinates still failed to understand him. Subsequently, Alexander executed those involved in the assassination for treason. However, a more troublesome issue soon arose. It turned out that the mastermind behind the entire plot was Parmenion, who, to eliminate any future threats, immediately sent his men to assassinate him. After this incident, Alexander feared that his generals would be unsettled. To stabilize the morale of the army, he promoted each leader by one rank, which helped to quell the unrest following the assassination attempt. He then led an army of 150,000 onward, with the entire force resembling a moving kingdom. It seemed that every step they took was laden with the glory of completing the unfinished conquests of their predecessors. Alexander's army advanced to the Kush Mountains. However, the natural barriers there made it difficult to cross. Reluctantly, he ordered the army to turn southward, heading toward the legendary riches of India. In this unknown land, they encountered many incredible sights, including talking birds and creatures covered in hair that resembled humans, which astonished the soldiers. Eventually, they captured these creatures, and Hephaistion explained that they were merely animals mimicking humans, referred to as monkeys by the local Indians. The journey to India broadened Alexander's horizons. However, a continuous downpour for 60 days took a heavy toll on the army, causing much of their food to rot and resulting in some deaths from snake bites. Despite this, they pressed on, penetrating deep into India, slaughtering all who resisted, capturing cities, and acquiring immense wealth. However, he decided to return those conquered lands to India as an ally, and also to send troops to help them defend India. His decision angered the generals, who were reluctant to accept the result. They questioned the purpose of their long and arduous campaign. As they voiced their doubts, Clitus stood up, emboldened by alcohol, and expressed the sentiments of the other generals. Clitus stated that all the soldiers had risked their lives to secure Alexander's throne, only to become exiles in the end. He even bluntly compared Alexander unfavorably to Philip, arguing that Philip would never have allowed them to befriend a defeated nation, and began to question Alexander's leadership abilities. This infuriated Alexander, who, in a moment of impulsive rage, stabbed Clitus, his trusted companion. Afterward, he felt deep regret, as Clitus had been like a brother to him. Alexander could not understand why, despite all his efforts for a unified cultural empire, no one seemed to comprehend his vision. This incident shook the soldiers' morale. When Alexander mentioned continuing the campaign again, the response from the army was sparse. An elderly general stood up, expressing their weariness of the eastern campaigns and their desire to return home to reunite with their families. After years of campaigning, familiar faces had been lost, replaced by former enemies. His words resonated with many soldiers, and some with ulterior motives seized the opportunity to rebel. Furious, Alexander executed the leading dissenters, but the army's morale had already diminished significantly. They continued southward, where they encountered Indian elephants and narrowly escaped total annihilation. This battle would be Alexander's last. Known as the Battle of the Hydaspes River, the unexpected attack by the Indian elephants caught them off guard, disrupting their formation and plunging the soldiers into chaos. Even though Alexander's soldiers were seasoned veterans, they suffered heavy losses. Seeing his men trampled by the war elephants, Alexander led a swift counterattack. When the Greek soldiers witnessed Alexander fall, they unleashed their potential, charging at the enemy. Ultimately, they managed to drive back the Indian elephants, but the battle was a Pyrrhic victory for Alexander. After this fight, the Macedonian army was no longer willing to continue the campaign. Reluctantly, Alexander announced the end of the Eastern expedition. Before leaving, he commissioned a statue of Bucephalus to be erected there. The army then began its journey back, enduring countless hardships until they finally returned to the Macedonian Empire. Thus, Alexander concluded his 6-year campaign in the east. Upon his return, he was met with devastating news. Hephaistion was gravely ill. In a fit of rage, Alexander shouted, for no one understood the significance of Hephaistion to him. Hephaistion was not just his brother, he was the only pure sanctuary in Alexander's heart. But no one in the imperial city could understand Alexander's feelings. At the party, as Alexander prepares to drink the strong drink in his hand, his mother's shadow is reflected in the glass. Looking around at the eager faces of his generals, it seemed as if everything had an answer. At the moment of Hephaestion's death, Alexander felt as if his own heart had already died. In despair, he downed the strong liquor in one gulp. As expected, the next day, Alexander fell gravely ill. Surrounded by people, everyone wanted to know who would become the first heir. At that moment, Alexander shed a tear of blood, as he seemed to see every inch of territory he had fought for. With the breaking of the imperial ring, this moment also marked the beginning of the dynasty's downfall. Soon, all of Alexander's generals began to fight over his body. A legendary emperor could not even find peace in his final moments. Thus, Alexander passed away on June 13, 326 BC. At that time, he was just a month shy of his 33rd birthday. In his brief life, he achieved a glory akin to that of his ancestor Achilles, even surpassing their accomplishments. Alexander not only established a super empire spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa, but he also left a profound impact on cultural thought. Through relentless conquests, he spread Greek culture in visual and written forms to other regions. Yet, none of his subordinates could understand his lofty ambitions. His ideals had transcended the capacity of the era. He earned the support of his generals through his exemplary leadership, but ultimately, he was abandoned for his unprecedented vision. In the end, Alexander drank the poisoned wine and transformed into an eagle, soaring away.